Start recording. There we go.
Excellent. We have made it basically to the end of the book.
Yes. Well, except for the
They
conclusion.
are larger content, yeah, other than the conclusion, which we'll do in our last video. So we are looking at so we're now looking at the method known as evidentialism. Evidentialism. The two thinkers are John Warwick Montgomery
Mhm.
and then is it Gary Habermas?
Yeah.
Habermas?
Hmm.
Probably Habermas, right? It sounds more German. Habermas, Gary
Yeah.
Habermas. Longer on Montgomery, shorter on Habermas. Um, but this will give us another apologetic approach. Did you want to open up beyond
Sure.
that brief introduction?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot that goes on in the John Warwick Montgomery chapter. There's a lot of kind of back and forth between different points of views, particularly with presuppositionalists. That seems to be the primary uh, butting heads with the
Yes.
evidentialism point of view.
Yeah.
And
Little bit on the classical apologists because the classical apologists try to get to a worldview
Mhm.
to then interpret facts, right?
Right, yeah, yeah, yeah. So
Uh, but yes,
one of
I
the
think
and then
that
there's one of the primary differences between the classical approach and the evidentialist approach is that classical, I think, allows more for probabilities in their conclusions. Now, they also
right.
do in evidentialism, but like the certain logic approach is more uh is a better approach from their point of view.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think one thing that was interesting that was brought up was from the presuppositionalist point of view, you have to presuppose in order to have knowledge.
Right.
So you you have to assume a worldview before you make like assumptions or facts or logic about things in the world.
Yeah.
Whereas in the evidentialist's point of view, it looks at the data and the facts of the universe and tries to extract that to a worldview or to an explanation. Um,
Correct. Correct.
so
And just to give a thumbnail sketch
yeah,
to our billions of viewers out there, um, evidentialism is an approach that is literally looking at facts, so historical facts, historical events, and by looking at all this evidence, let's say, the fact itself will point to a particular interpretation.
right.
Um, and obviously, then for these apologists who are Christians, that the facts of history and the facts that come out of the Bible and other things like that, all they argue point heavily in favor of the truth of Christianity.
Hmm. And the
And
approach
yeah,
the approach is very similar to the legal systems that you see in like America
yep,
and Europe,
yeah,
where you there are some things in the book that talks about like we can get to maybe like, but innocent until proven guilty, not accepting like absurd things,
right,
and compounding like an argument using the evidence. Um,
right. I think the legal one. So I would look at three in particular
mhm,
in terms of their methodology. They compared it to um, scientific, work.
mhm,
Namely, the scientist is going to be looking at data, and that data will lead to a particular hypothesis. Although I might question it because we've talked before about whether or not a hypothesis was really developed before, or at least in conjunction with observations, right?
mhm,
So scientific method, it would be it embraces a historical method of whatever all the reasoning that goes into historiography in terms of discovering past artifacts, letters, all the things that a historian uses in order to make historical claims, and then legal reasoning as well. And I feel like the legal reasoning is maybe one of the better ones to I think it's one of the clearer ones of those three to say, hey, this, you know, this happens in the legal context every day. We all sort of accept this legal reasoning to find out who the criminal was, what the motivations were, who, so on and so forth,
Hmm.
um, by looking at evidence. Um, and by the way, you're doing it seemingly without a worldview. I think you're doing it with a background knowledge, but you're
Right.
not doing it with a worldview, right? You're doing it with
Yeah.
background knowledge for sure, like
Hmm.
how things work. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Um, that a broken window and missing property most likely leads to the idea that there was an intruder.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
but I feel like in my mind the legal reasoning was a really really good one to sort of combat. You got to have a worldview, so on and so forth. But on the other side, um, I do I don't know if I'm challenging you, but I'm wondering about to what extent there are really brute facts
Mm-hmm.
that that lead to an interpretation.
Hmm.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
we're always coming to something with assumptions and presuppositions of different sorts, and we're looking at
Right.
not necessarily religious, but we're looking at a brute fact. Well, there is no, in this case, there wouldn't be a brute fact, but we're
Hmm.
looking at quote unquote facts through that grid.
Yeah.
I lean to a degree in that direction. What do you think about that?
That's
Like
Yeah.
brute
It's
fact.
I don't know. It was one of the things that was brought up. It's like what is it? Facts kind of what is it?
Point
They
to an
point, yeah, they
interpretation,
point to an interpretation. So they're not self-interpreting, but they point
right?
to an interpretation. So, and that's not individual facts that are going to do that. It's going to be a collection of facts together that point to interpretations. Which I guess would that makes sense to me. Yeah, I think I like that approach because you can come at it from a common ground
Right.
with anybody. Um, but yeah, I don't know. There's some nuances, I guess, in later parts of the of how it's used to create interpretations.
Right.
Because I guess you have to consider whether or not the interpretation is the best interpretation.
Sure.
Because there could be multiple interpretations.
Well, I mean, this didn't really come up in the book, but
Hmm.
one of the greatest uh, postmodern critiques of truth
Hmm.
is that, well, one for postmoderns, there is no truth. There are a bunch of meta narratives and
Hmm.
all these little communities that are all they wouldn't use this worldview, but they're all sort of colored by a particular worldview, and there's no way to get outside of that worldview. We're enmeshed in it. So whenever we look at facts or interpreting anything, um, it's interpretation all the way down.
Hmm.
In other words, you're never going to find the truth per se. Now, I'm not saying I agree with the postmodern critique, but that's one of their big sort of claims. A good example would be in literary theory, and I know that literary theory was brought up here, but in literary theory, they would basically say, the author is dead, and even if the author is
Hmm.
alive, the author cut off from the book. It's its own sort of existing thing, and
Right.
it can mean virtually anything. Now, I think some of that is absurd, you because you and I can read a book together, and even if
Yeah.
it's not the exact same interpretation, they're gonna overlap to a
Hmm.
degree. Um, so I think that's sort of the elephant in the room for this theory. Is it the case that there are sort of just simple facts that we can see as simple facts and they lead to a particular interpretation? In legal reasoning, yes, right?
Right.
It's not always without flaws, but
Right. And
well,
I guess
yeah,
there are, from even the legal perspective, there are kind of either assumptions or presuppositions that are made, and they're kind of like they're social construct presuppositions or assumptions, like, or just
right,
human behavior, like psychology assumptions,
yeah,
just how people behave historically or in certain contexts, or just cause and effect kind of,
Oh,
that you can use in legal cases, uh, to figure out like what happened. Um,
sure.
so I think you do kind of have that mindset. Like there is some sort of mindset. You're not coming from nothing, at least.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Also, I noticed something. Your mic is, hello.
What?
Your mic is a little muffled, but when I talk, it seems to get better. I don't fully
Huh.
understand that. Hey, buddy.
That's odd. There we go.
For me.
The cat makes a scene in the video.
He does.
That's just odd. I'll just try and be closer
Okay.
to the microphone.
Mhm. Um. So yeah.
So I guess let me put it in a different way. Do you think that we can come to facts with a blank? I don't want to say a blank slate. How free of presuppositions or assumptions can we be when we confront facts?
Um. I don't know. I mean, like stating a fact is one thing, but when you're interpreting it, that's another issue.
Right, because it seems like there's going to be a lot involved. Um, and I should really say this to the last video, but one thing I've been thinking about in reading this book is that there seems to be, and again, we're getting a summary of these views from the author, but there seems to be like a pretty great amount of certainty with
Oh,
these
really? What?
apologists. There seems to be a great amount of certainty with these apologists
Yeah.
that Christianity is true.
Hmm.
But I feel like I feel like when I'm reading it, I'm not necessarily convinced fully of the arguments, right?
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder to what degree they to what a lot of them were brought up as Christians. To what degree they've already embraced this over time, such that their worldview is colored,
Yeah.
and therefore they
Absolutely.
see the facts as a little bit more like, oh my goodness, I'm certain that this is connected to Christianity. It's just been a thought because I was like, I haven't really gotten the smackdown argument. I mean, we've looked at a couple of arguments. We both agreed on the strength of certain arguments,
Hmm.
but the whole, I feel like we're getting we have certainty about pieces,
Hmm.
right? But not the whole. And so it makes me wonder. I'm bringing this up because to what degree is worldview uh, influencing not so much the arguments like the existence of God and stuff like that, but more
The
I don't know
approach
the
or the.
the interpreting of
Mm,
facts in this case.
yeah.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. Hmm.
I'll give you an example. Like the level of certainty both thinkers have for everything for testament of the testimony of the Gospels, and in particular the resurrection. I was like, I'm not sure that I'm not sure that to what degree that's certain. You
Hmm.
know, like at least not for myself, but at least in terms of the arguments that are offered.
Right.
You know, I
Yeah.
mean, like resurrection, big one. You know, and Hume's critique notwithstanding, which was brought up, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's sort of like sort of a vast majority of scholars agree on X, Y, and Z, and I'm like, I don't know. That's
Well, they agree on the facts, and then he's using those
true,
facts as like probability points for the interpretation.
right? No, I got you.
Yeah.
I mean, I
So
get
I
some
get,
of the
yeah, I
points where
get the approach.
that he was crucified,
Mhm.
you know, that he died, that the apostles really had no good reason to steal the body,
Mhm.
um, right? And then yeah, and then it's well, the empty tomb, I guess, becomes the piece that's most incredible, right?
Yeah. Hmm.
The hardest one to sort of grasp.
Yeah, and there's not a good, I guess, secular explanation
I
for it
guess
or
that's one of it,
documented
right?
one. Yeah.
Other than the Martian one wearing Jesus skin, you know,
Yeah.
but that was offered in the book
Yeah. Hmm.
as an absurd.
Hmm.
So, but anyway, I'm sorry. It would get a little-
Yeah. Let's see.
We did talk about the legal reasoning bit, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
In Montgomery, anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was a. I mean, this is from page 295. Just a thing. So this is about legal stuff as well. But
Yeah.
all matters of fact are limited to probabilistic confirmation, yet probabilistic confirmation is sufficient for even life and death decisions in both daily life
Sure.
and law. So
Hmm. Hmm.
you don't have to be 100% certain
You know
about
what's
everything.
funny? In the criticism, did you read the criticism at the end of Habermas?
Yeah.
So that's I think that I think has only been referenced. Was it Greg Bonson? I guess his name is. Is that right?
Which was it?
It was the presuppositionalist, the Van Tillian.
Yeah.
Hold on, I think it
Oh, was it the
was
thing that was like
Bonson. Yeah,
just
Greg
where
Bonson.
have you done like we're doing all this work to explain our like how the facts line up, but the presuppositionalists haven't done anything. It's very hand
Haven't done
wavy.
anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. But the one I was thinking about in terms of what we were just talking about,
Hmm.
it was I thought it was really interesting, but and I haven't fully wrapped my head around it. But it was the idea that it had the presuppositionalists are critical of inductive reasoning in part. In part, there are a couple of criticisms, but one of their issues is that inductive reasoning only leads to probability. Probability will never be 100%, and
Right.
therefore, in all of those apologetic methods, they the sinner has an excuse
Hmm.
not
Has
to
a
believe
small
that.
percentage of
Yes,
excuse.
yes.
Yeah.
Whereas with their approach, because it's allegedly deductive, it's 100% certain,
Right.
even though the argument itself is, well, I mean, it was called an indirect argument, a transcendental argument, but I failed to see the argument,
Hmm. Yep.
you know. But I thought that was interesting, that little margin. Well, now the believer has an excuse not to believe, and I guess would be sort of justified in not believing.
In not believing, yeah. Um,
With that percentage, although it seems like the flip side would be, well, no, I mean, that's a really small percent. Whatever. If you're at 90%, are you with me? You're at ninety
yeah.
percent.
Hmm.
You've got a very good reason to believe,
Yeah.
even if you don't have total certainty. You know,
Yeah.
I
So
thought it was
they're
an,
just
I had not expected to see that.
yeah, they're just approaching it from different perspectives.
Yeah,
The
and
one
not
is
just
like
going with your.
the one is like, the 90% is like, oh, it takes you all the way to 90%, and then, faith is the remaining 10. And then
Yeah, oh, that was funny.
presupposition presuppositionalists are like, oh, well, that's just 10% of potential doubt or,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, exactly, exactly. That one was a weird one too.
Hmm.
That I remember reading that. It was like not even get 90% proof. 10, you fill in the 10% with faith. Like
Yeah.
I just like I don't know how you. Again, goes back to Bayes' theorem, how you put a numerical term,
Yeah.
or how you quantify faith
Hmm.
in this. You in this. So anyway, so yeah,
Right. Yeah, presuppositionalists argue that Christianity is the best explanation,
yeah,
whereas presuppositionalists argue that it's the only explanation.
right, right.
There's an interesting thing. Let's see. This is on page 298 near the bottom. For example, those who claim that a creator is untenable because that creator must also have a creator fail to realize the problem of an. Oh, this is the infinite regress. Never mind. Also, the universe cannot explain itself.
Oh, I
I'm
totally
I
thought
don't.
you in this.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand why the universe cannot explain itself, and is that not what apologists are doing, being a part of the universe, trying to explain it?
So let's. But did you also see the? Was this also where they were talking about the cyclical theory that we were?
No, that's later.
They addressed it though.
They
They
did.
totally addressed it. Oh, no, no, it's okay. Yeah, yeah, it'll be later. So I don't know. This is work on this since you already pointed it out.
Yeah.
Uh,
I don't understand why the universe, nothing in the universe, well, this, yeah, nothing in it can explain itself. Um,
for example, those who claim the creator is untenable because the creator must. Okay, we already know that one. Must have a creator, fail to realize the problem. Also, the universe cannot explain itself. Nothing in it can explain itself. So a non-contingent absolute creator is far more sensible. Just going up a little bit more, of course, we cannot prove our own position merely by. Okay, okay. So maybe to theorize it a little bit, within it is the case that within a closed system, so the universe is going to be my analog here. The
oh, wait, this
the
is the
system.
presuppositionalist point of view, right?
No,
Montgomery gives several examples of confronting non-Christian presuppositions.
non-Christian presuppositions. Okay, sure, because he starts to hit on Marx, then he starts to hit on liberal Western utopian central planning, right?
Hmm.
Right. Um, and then so yeah, it's and actually this is under the second point of four, if I believe, which is there should be a frontal attack on prevailing non-Christian worldviews and the presuppositional heart of their beliefs. Okay,
Hmm.
so that's all within that context. But I think he's also saying these should be addressed, but there's no way that we're going to be able to address them all. There's no way you're going to be able to attack all of them.
Hmm.
Right? He says that at some point. Yeah, of course we cannot, or no, we cannot prove our own position merely by showing that others are inadequate,
Yeah,
since there is a near infinite number of views. No guarantee that even one of them we are considering is true.
right.
So the last man standing approach will not work. Um, However, we must remove the false hope offered by the fallacious reasoning of alternatives. Um, and that's and the fallacious reasoning of alternatives, I think, are embedded in each one of these examples. Sorry, is the infinite regress creator,
Hmm.
the universe can explain itself. Um, I think this is basically saying that and I'm not sure that I fully grasp it either. It's saying that something. I mean, I would say that the universe in its totality can't explain itself. There needs to be something like a mind, ours, to do the explaining,
But it says
or
nothing in it can explain itself. Does that mean we cannot explain our own existence?
nothing in it can explain itself. So nothing in it would be, we would be included in
Yeah.
that, right?
This repeats on page 303 at the very
I
top.
wonder if, go for it.
Nothing in the world can explain itself.
Three
This
where?
is 303.
Okay.
Um, what is exactly? Hence, he agrees with the common objection to himself's ontological argument. Just looking at context. He does accept the cosmological argument from contingency. To paraphrase his version, one, nothing in the world can explain itself. Two, the world is the sum of the sum total of everything in it. Three, as a whole, the world is contingent and requires an explanation beyond itself. That is, a transcendent God. And then continues. But yeah, nothing in the world can explain itself is the first.
Can we give it another word for explain? Like, what? How do you understand that? Like,
It sounds like give reason.
ultimate.
It
Yeah,
sounds like give
it's all.
reason for. Yeah.
Nothing in the world can explain itself.
Or is it like totally understand? Like that doesn't sound right. That's probably
Nothing in the
more
world.
accurate.
Yeah. I wonder if this goes back a little bit to our meaning discussion.
Yeah.
Not to not to go back there,
Yeah.
but that there has to be something. I mean, take it like all right, let's take the book. Let's take the book and the author. So setting aside the postmodern critique that I mentioned before, the book and the author, in the oldest sense of the meaning of a text, is
Hmm.
that the author is the one that's endowing it with meaning.
Right.
There needs to be something outside of it that tells us, oh, no, 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 this is actually what I meant, or so on and so forth.
Okay.
Right. And
Hmm.
I know in our postmodern period, or postmodern, whatever we're in, is suspicious of that, that the author holds the ultimate meaning. But that's the best analogy I could think of, that within that system of the universe, so whatever the universe is, therefore, like the book,
Hmm.
the non-contingent necessary being, aka God, is like the author.
Yeah, that makes sense, but it sounds like you have to approach it from that perspective. Like you have, in order for this flow of logic to work, because it's ending up at the transcendent God, you need to be able to prove that nothing in the world can explain itself
Yeah.
first, and not say that you can't explain itself,
No,
well,
wait, wait.
because you were
Oh,
created and you were given meaning, right?
yeah. I'm going to say that I'm going to say that that particular premise is probably not very well worded.
It's paraphrased, so I'd
Um,
be curious to see the
or
original, but
yeah,
yeah.
or it's a premise that needs explaining,
Hmm.
pun intended. Um,
The premise
no,
cannot
but I would
explain
say,
itself.
I, but I would say, I, I think what it's really getting at is, I mean, like, for instance, how does that even make sense? Let's just take medical science. I mean, so medical science, that's a whole bunch of humans that are trying to understand the workings of the body. Okay,
Hmm.
boom. I mean, maybe they don't understand it fully, but I would say they have a pretty good grasp of it, over the years. And then you can go into any industry where you have any expert, and they have been explaining pieces. So
Hmm.
this must be ultimate. I mean, this must be like the ultimate why of the universe, right?
Okay.
Why? Why is there a universe? Why do I exist? Why are there intelligent beings? I think it must be those ultimate questions.
Hmm.
Um, and maybe what it's saying, that without the God notion, I understand that God comes in later in the argument, but just to flip it, without God, then we will not be able to answer those ultimate questions. Um,
Maybe.
what's that?
Maybe.
I'm trying to do best to get at the
Yeah,
premise, or
I think
what it's trying to mean.
I guess
Because
I
we could
okay, so
certainly,
I agree that like, nothing in the world can explain itself. If you are trying to say that I can explain why everything, like every cell in my body is the way that it is and it, is moving in the way that it does and does all the things that it does, well then I'm not really explaining myself at this point. So you have to there has to be a definition of what explaining itself means too, right?
yeah,
Because if I take
yeah,
that approach, then in order to explain myself, I do have to explain the universe, basically. I
yeah,
have to explain
yeah.
why,
You'll get back there.
yeah,
You'll get to those ultimately,
yeah.
right?
So now, I mean, I guess what's interesting is things can explain other things,
Hmm. Hmm.
but like nothing in the world can explain itself doesn't mean that it can't explain something else. Explain
Yeah.
something else. So that's another interesting thing because it's like if you can explain like how a fly works, like down to the atom, but you can't
Yeah.
explain yourself.
But is that what it is? Is that what it is? That there literally needs to be an other that does the explaining?
Um, yeah, it
Is that simply
requires an
down?
explanation beyond itself. Yeah, and because
So
the world,
so right.
like the argument goes, because the world is the sum total of everything in it, it cannot explain itself, and as a whole, the world is contingent and requires an explanation beyond itself, and then that's where it gets to the transcendent God. So it sounds kind of like the causation argument,
So,
but
well, it does, but it's using explain instead
yeah,
of
it is.
cause,
Yeah,
right?
or
Nothing in the world
begins
can
to
cause
exist.
itself, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, or nothing in the world can cause itself. The world is the sum total of everything in it. A whole, I'm sorry, as a whole, the world is contingent and requires a cause,
Beyond itself. Yeah.
yeah, beyond itself. So it does sound like that. I feel like The explanation bit is tricky.
Yeah, it's a
I mean,
weird change of words.
at the bottom it says, after it gives the argument, it says, why don't we simply accept the world as it is without an explanation? A world without explanation would deny the, quote, contingent nature of the world and mythologically make it absolute in the face of all empirical knowledge of its non self explanatory character, unquote.
Hmm.
Um, but who created God? The question is nonsensical since whatever is absolute does not require an explanation. If it did, it would not be absolute. The world is clearly contingent. There is no evidence to suggest that
Hmm.
God is. I don't know if that actually helps clarify anything.
Right.
The quote is chunky,
Yeah.
and you know what I'm saying. Um, but I wonder if it's like it can't explain itself because it, it's not able to look down upon it. I cannot get outside of myself to be able to look at myself,
Hmm.
and I feel like this starts to slip into objectivity versus subjectivity, right? So I can
Hmm.
never really have an objective view of myself because I'm in myself with my thoughts and my past and
Right.
everything everything that's causing me, and so it's sort of like the shrink to the patient or the doctor to the patient much more allegedly objectivity because there's something outside looking on and not enmeshed in my subjectivity.
Hmm.
I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Um,
Yeah.
I wonder, or is it also the contingent thing? You know, the contingent basically mean it could not have been, right? So it could have been, it could not have been.
Hmm.
Where it's necessary, it has to be.
Right.
Does it hinge on the contingency of the universe as well as this whole having to have something outside of it in order to really explain it?
Right.
I don't know. I'm going back to the artist or the author in the book or the artist in the painting. That there's, you know what I'm saying? There's this separate being out there that created it and is therefore able to provide an explanation.
Hmm.
I literally, or just by the fact that it's there, is able to. Um, I mean, I will say this: at least, I mean, the one thing I thought was really interesting too, like on the human rights,
Yeah.
that was a really interesting section. Um, the With natural law theory, and I know he actually goes back and critiques it a little bit, but the natural law theory is basically like um, connected to God, right?
Hmm.
God has imposed this order on the world, and we can sense parts of this natural law in terms of how things work in the world. Um, I will say, and I think we talked about this again last week in terms of morality, is that I will say that an absolute necessary being does ground objectivity in a much better way, more effective way than the lack of that being.
Yeah. That's fair.
Because the like I really thought it was interesting with so why am I bringing this up? Does that sort of help us with this section because it starts to it, it allows for an objective meaning, right,
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
of the universe. But with morality, you ground it in an absolute necessary being, then you have real morality. Um, you what was the other? Oh, the other one. I thought, yeah, that was right. When they were talking about logical, was it logical positivism?
Yeah.
It was a new notion of what the law was, but it's not even grounded. Like it was like a construct. Um, and um, so and again, maybe it doesn't matter for certain people, right?
Hmm.
But certainly, um, I don't know, whatever. Getting the law, getting the Ten Commandments from God certainly does give it a grounding, as opposed to I don't know Thomas Hobbes or John Locke. This whole idea of sort of um, giving up your rights, giving someone
Yeah.
freedom,
Right.
to have protection. There's something qualitatively different about those,
Right.
you know. Um, so I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know either. I think that was interesting to me. I think I can kind of wrap my head around why it might be the case that nothing in the world can explain itself.
Yeah.
But later on that page, there were a couple things that were stated that I mean, I don't fully grasp the reason why. But
Yeah.
on the third paragraph, it says God must be rational since we creatures are rational. My question would be
Hmm.
why.
Yeah.
And then it says he must be personal since persons do not come from what is impersonal. My question would be why. And then he must be moral since humans and their societies are moral. And my question would be why.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, why is that necessary?
So the question would be, so we already have God
Yeah,
by the
if
time you come to
okay, yeah,
statements. Is that correct?
yeah,
Is that correct? Um,
yeah. Why must God be rational if since because we creatures are rational?
well,
Like, is I don't know. Could there be some
so
superset to rationality that exists and like I understand that there must be a rational aspect of God in order for something rational to exist, right? But it doesn't sound like it needs to be his total existence is rational, like or he
oh,
does like he doesn't have to
well,
be
he's
rational in
at,
all
well,
aspects.
oh, right. I do think it, all right, so I do think it would be odd that God, so let's define rational.
Okay.
I mean, it ultimately comes from the etymologically it comes from ratio, which means reason.
Hmm.
So it's when one is rational, they are providing they're providing a reason that's guided by critical thinking, that's guided by logic. Okay,
Hmm.
I mean, at least I would say that um, I don't know that this one I have an easier time grasping because
This one was
how
probably easier to make sense of than the other
that
two.
yeah because how could like so if we're already admitting that there's a God and we're already admitting that this God created,
Hmm.
and here we are as um, let's say that the highest of what we know,
Hmm.
the beings with the highest level of rationality from what we
Yeah.
know. It would seem odd that the creator would not be operating according to some level of rationality.
Yeah, no, I
It
agree to
also,
some, yeah, but does it
yeah,
have to be total?
yeah.
Does his being have
Uh,
to be rational? Like, can he make irrational decisions? Like,
uh, oh, right, right, right. I see. If and this goes back then to our definition of God because we already admitted we've got God at the start of this. We've
well,
got God
yeah.
at the
So,
start of
but
this.
the start of this, what brought
So
us here was that he was transcendent, and created the world. It says nothing else
right,
about God in this flow of logic to get to what God is.
sure, sure. But what I'm wondering is 30 minutes. Um, your cat came in. My kid
You're
came in.
good.
Um, so um, sorry. I was going to say if we already have the God notion,
Hmm.
then we are we saying that this God is perfect, or are we saying that this God is has all these omniscient, omnipotent, omnibenevolent?
Hmm.
Like so, you know what I'm saying? If we already have that notion of perfection, then it would seem that it would and it has some level, and it is rational. Would it be ultimately rational? Would it be with me?
Sure. So, because it's um right. So because the God is considered perfect in all aspects, then if he has any sort of rationality, then it would make sense that he would be completely
Yeah, and
rational.
also too, we're talking about something another thing that comes to mind is that rationality, um, if I can say this, is good. Okay,
Hmm.
um, as you know, it's a good trait. So like it's something that we would, as opposed to irrationality, right? Or like good actions versus evil actions. So therefore, if you have a being that is ultimate and perfect, would it have that good trait in perfection? You know what I'm saying? Or would it
Mm-hmm.
have it perfectly, to be clearer?
Right. Well, is rationality good because it's predictable?
I think, well, I mean,
Is that I don't know. Is that
I don't
is
know,
it predictable?
rationality. So
Just having a like
rationality, why is rationality good? I feel like the alternative is, and this is going to probably be like a pragmatic argument, but the alternative, well, maybe it's also a logical one too, but the alternative um, is, I mean, it can be dangerous. It can be, I don't know. When you look at what reason can do, and I'm not saying all reasons, because a lot of, well, I would say that some reasons are have not been fully thought out. But if you look at what reason can do, it seems that reason um, provides a lot of good in the world or in the
mhm,
individual or within communities. So I think we can look to, I mean, even if you're just looking at like bridge building, it's a rational process,
right.
or writing a constitution. It's a rational process. It can be tweaked. It needs to be tweaked,
Hmm.
but it seems like rationality is like everywhere. I'm not saying everyone is rational all the
Right.
time, but all, I mean, your discipline as a programmer is reason based. Engineering, history, teaching methodology. It's what seems to be widespread.
Hmm.
It can be used and misused, um, but if reason is doing its job and rational people are doing its job, then there's a corrective to it,
Right.
right? I'm wrong. Okay, good point. You
Hmm.
pointed that out. I thank you for that. And,
Yeah.
uh,
I guess so. I don't know.
but
It
it's not the only thing, though, right? I mean, like love is quite important as well, right?
well, yeah. Love
Um,
love works too, but does being fully rational preclude any sort of emotion? Right. Like love
preclude?
as an
No,
action works
yeah,
because you can have reasons for it. But
yeah,
but can you be fully rational and have emotional responses to things?
yeah. So once again, we're dealing. I'm probably going to go back to finitude versus infinitude.
Hmm.
Um, we are, the mind and being of God being fully rational, but also God, at least in the Bible, is described as being love.
Hmm.
It seems like we're getting into the mind of God, which is really tricky.
Right. Hmm. But
Right?
like
I
I don't
mean,
know.
it's good. I mean,
Wait.
I would
Okay.
say a
So
fully rational being, as we understand it, like fully rational,
yeah.
you got problems.
Yeah.
Okay, it seems like you got problems because there's no room then for an emotional capacity, and we all know that we need that to balance. We need it
Hmm.
in terms of relating and
Yeah.
caring. So I'm not saying God's 100% reason. I'm just saying that with that trait, God's God's God would have the omni, right, of reason,
Yeah.
but that he wouldn't only be reason. He would also have the omni of love,
Yeah. And I don't think
or
that conflicts. I think
right,
it would
right,
conflict with
exactly,
emotion. I mean, at least as defined by human emotion, which is very
sure,
chemical
sure,
oriented and, you know,
right.
precludes
I think the
reasoning.
person one
Yeah.
the
So then
person
person
one
is
has
different.
to deal with we're so you're like a person's going to have a number. Actually, this is a fun little exercise to do in philosophy, right? How do you define a human? That's interesting. But how do
Yeah.
you define a person, right?
Right.
Because and what can be included in that category, right? Sometimes people even include dolphins because
Hmm.
once you list the traits, you're like, oh, personhood. This is really interesting, and also how personhood is understood in law is
Hmm.
also very interesting because corporations are considered persons. So, boom, right?
Right.
Um, so, intelligence. would certainly be an aspect.
Hmm.
Language ability would certainly be an aspect of person. So basically, you'd end up defining, like, um, you know, the traits of what makes a person, and then ask the question of, well, do I fit in it?
Hmm.
And I probably will. And does God also have those traits?
Right.
We certainly have intelligence. Um,
That seems like
uh,
correlation, though. Like, why is it necessary that persons come from persons? Like, a,
hmm,
yeah,
yeah, no, no, because that is the line.
yeah,
You're right. You know, where else would they come from? I mean, I guess you could do evolution, like a raw atheistic evolution,
yeah.
right?
That's kind of, well, yeah.
Right.
That's the counter, I guess.
Yeah. The so you know God, and then then whatever, you just need a lot of time and blue green algae, and then you get us.
Hmm.
You know. So persons would, yeah, evolve.
Right.
Um,
From structure, or
right.
structure would
So
evolve.
you
That's interesting.
sure,
Hmm.
sure. So that would be an alternative. You know, I mean, to be fair, I feel like there are statements in this book, and I don't want to damn Brian Morley, who, by the way, I was actually thinking of sending him an email with the link to these videos.
Oh
Like,
yeah,
hey, if you might just like to know, we've talked through your book. But sometimes we found that just certain things aren't explained.
yeah,
And I
and
don't know, like, in other words, it's like, whoa, like this, you know?
yeah,
But
and
but also too, is this a passing point that doesn't need to be elaborated because there's a bigger point that's being made?
hmm,
That it's still fair though to question everything,
yeah,
even the small points. So you're right. This is making a causal claim.
hmm,
Persons, you persons can only come from person.
yeah, and then
So
also morals can only come from a moral being. Is he? Yeah.
yeah, he must be moral since humans and their societies are moral, though that does not tell us which of the competing moral codes are right.
Hmm.
I mean, that's, yeah. Um, I think the basic idea behind this is that, if you're, as we already admitted, if God is in, then we already have to have some notion about what God is, and um, and then we, it. Well, actually, it's doing the reverse. It's doing like, hey, because I'm rational, God must be rational. Because I'm a person, God,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
Because there's morality in the world, it points back to God.
Yep.
Um, so, um, yeah,
Yeah, and like I don't know. I again, we're within the universe, so I don't know if this applies because we're not necessarily transcendent from it. Um,
sure,
but we can invent worlds that contradict our beingness, right? We can come up with irrational ideas and worlds, and granted, we're not perfect and we're not like fully rational. So it
sure,
doesn't. I don't know. If something doesn't like we can invent non-moral worlds and impersonal ones in our
yeah,
brains. So like, why couldn't God do that as well? Does it mean that like because we live in a world that has those structures, does that mean that God has all of those qualities?
sure. I see. You know what? I was avoiding this piece because it doesn't come up in the argument. But if you include that humans are made in the image of God, then you can see a connection,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
So if we are God bearers, as it were, not gods ourselves, but we bear this resemblance to God.
Yeah.
Now I know that that wasn't included, and I didn't want to include it, but if it is included, then I feel like rationality, personality, and morality all follow.
Sure. I think that goes
Okay.
the other direction though.
Right. You're absolutely right.
Hmm.
You're absolutely right.
Which is
Um,
more of a presuppositionalist point of view in that you have the belief and then you explain the world
sure,
as opposed to
sure.
looking at the evidence and explaining where it came from.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
getting back to it. Yeah, I mean, I would say from a different, like, vantage point, but still dealing with these pieces. It does amaze me that you do have more, especially the ancient world. The modern world, this doesn't hold, just because lines of communication are so quick, and we we know what's going on in every part of the
Hmm.
world in a second. But in the ancient world, what I find absolutely mind blowing is the prevalence of religion. You don't find any secular culture, any atheistic culture, and also the prevalence of a moral code.
Hmm.
Even if the moral code is like draconian, but it's
Yeah.
still a moral code. That's interesting
Yeah.
because they're all disparate, they're all separated, and they're not communicating with each other. There's no, you would think there's no way that they could be like, hey, I'm in India. You guys should try this in Mesopotamia. You
Hmm.
know, that is interesting, and it
Yeah.
says, it either the evolutionist is going to have to come up with some, or the sociologist or whatever, or anthropologist is going to have to come up with some type of non-God theory as to why that happens. But I
Hmm.
feel like it's so abundant that it points to something more transcendent.
Sure. Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying? Like, you don't find one. You find variety in all the religions, but you don't find one that's just straight up secular.
Hmm. Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. I mean, they all have that aspect of awe. Can't remember what it was called in an earlier chapter.
yeah,
But that like there's something mystical about the universe. That's something supernatural. So
yeah,
there aren't. I guess the more correct way to saying it is that it's maybe secular is the right word. I don't know if it's the right word, but
yeah,
that
sure.
the historical communities were um oh I just lost it. What was it?
Ancient world, all these different religions.
Super wait,
Sorry,
which super
let's help.
no
Try to help you.
super not superficial. Why am I trying?
Supernatural.
Supernatural. That they all
Okay.
believed they all had supernatural beliefs.
Yeah.
Whereas um there are societies now, or I guess maybe I don't know the definition of secular, but
Yeah.
the predominant belief is very scientific and non-supernatural.
Right. Secular, just think non-religious.
Okay, okay.
Yeah. Actually, that's literally what they actually call like priests, or sorry, not priests, but some within religious communities they'll actually call them a secular something or other because they're not doing like the religious part of
Mm,
the religion.
mhm.
That was a really bad definition, but so secular, sort of like without God, or I mean, sometimes it's like public, right?
Right.
Um, but or naturalistic. Yeah.
Yeah. But that wouldn't necessarily like. Well, I don't know. I guess atheist would be under that category, but agnostic wouldn't
Or,
necessarily.
yeah, yeah, but practically speaking, would, and by practically, their life is no different than
What do you
unless
mean?
they're searching it. And I, well, because the agnostic doesn't know, and in so not knowing, I can't speak for every agnostic, but in so not knowing is probably not going to be practicing a religion.
Just yeah. I don't know. That's weird. Like.
You with me? Unless they're searching, do you know? Like it
Hmm.
could be the case that they're like, I'm agnostic, but I still feel this pull, you know, to go to synagogue or something like that.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like you can have an agnostic that has supernatural beliefs
That okay?
or like recognize supernatural, uh, like a supernatural aspect to the universe. I don't know if that counts as being religious though, or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
non-secular.
Um, so that doesn't fully make sense to me, just because they would be not knowing. They literally don't know either way if there's a supernatural. So I wouldn't know how they
Uh,
would make a claim to the supernatural
hmm. Yeah,
unless there's
I guess.
phenomena we're talking about. You know?
Yeah, I guess it depends on what they're agnostic to.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. Right. No, that's true.
Hmm.
I'm sorry. If we're talking about theism and they're agnostic
Yeah.
in that sense, then they don't believe in a God, or
Right.
but they're not going to say they know it doesn't exist.
Right. Yeah.
I just don't know the way.
Yeah.
But yes, you're right. You can be agnostic about pieces.
Yeah. Hmm.
I believe in a God, but I'm agnostic about religion,
Hmm.
something like that. So,
Yeah.
um, good. Are we good?
Yeah. I mean, I guess just a
I mean,
quick.
there's a lot more.
Yeah,
There's a
there's a
lot more
lot
to talk
more.
about, but we're covering, this was a large chapter on Montgomery.
Mhm.
The case for the resurrection was really interesting. Um,
Yeah.
Very interesting.
There was
I'm sure your memory was jogged when he was talking about the New Testament documents as well from the book we read on the canon.
yep, a lot of
Uh,
that was repeated. I just wanted
yeah.
to insert real quickly, like the oscillating universe theory,
Yes. Yes.
contradicted
What
with.
page was that?
It was also on 303 at the very bottom. Um,
303?
yep,
Yeah, because I
the
totally
second
thought about
law
you.
of
Yeah.
the second law of thermodynamics is what they're using to contradict it, which is basically very paraphrased, but that second law of thermodynamics requires a closed system, one that receives no energy from outside it eventually runs down, and that's the law of entropy. Um,
Right.
so if it were to oscillate, then uh, basically it's getting to a state of higher energy at the beginning of the universe and rolling down that hill and then going
Right.
back up. I again, there are probably issues with the law of thermodynamics that I'm not aware of when it comes to black holes and
Sure.
things like that.
Sure.
It's just hard to imagine because all like the heat death of the universe, as far as I understand it, is that eventually everything is absorbed into a bunch of black holes, and then
Hmm.
I think they combine or they might dissipate slowly. There's something there, so I don't know exactly what it would take for an oscillating universe to go from that state to the next one, or if the second law of thermodynamics is true in the presence of black holes. I don't know exactly how
Right.
that
Right.
works, because
I
you're
got
dealing
you.
with
I got
numbers
you.
that are just weird to calculate. But yeah,
Sure.
if you're
No. Nope.
subscribing to that law, then yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally thought about you there, but you're basically saying that the last sentence in particular, an oscillating universe which explodes and collapses in on itself in endless cycles, would similarly conflict with the second law, and you're not sure of that.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it makes sense if it would conflict with the second law.
Okay.
I think that the second law. I don't think that the second law of thermodynamics is like fully. I mean, it's part of a theory. So
Right.
I don't think it's fully explained in the context of like how black holes work and that kind of stuff.
Got it.
Yeah.
I got you. I got you. Right. Because the whole operation of black holes themselves, we're not fully sure because we can't fully investigate.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Right. Unless you want to become like a noodle. Stretch.
True. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Then you would know for like a hot second.
Yeah, you would.
Oh.
Maybe. I don't.
All right.
All right. Yep. I don't know if there's anything else I wanted to mention.
Well, there's a lot more to talk, but
There
we're sort
is.
of at time.
Yep.
I mean, we can
Yeah, we can
include them
reference them at the beginning of next
we
time
could
we do
reference
the
more in the next video because it's a
conclusion.
short chapter and we'll have a lot to talk about anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Sounds good. Alrighty, I will stop the recording now.